There's a lot going on in this movie.
It was like I was watching it for the first time.
I like this movie.
It has a special place in my heart.
Very close to my heart.
This was a good one.
I want to like this movie.
What? Seriously?
I loved it.
Very flat, kind of boring.
This movie blows me away. This movie turns me on.
Terrible. It is terrible. All these keys everywhere. Influences, baby.
Huge, huge fan.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Hello and welcome out there in podcast and YouTube land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, a podcast and YouTube channel where two guys get together. We talk about horror and science fiction, films, television, talk about a little bit of both of those today probably, and a variety of other topics, but all relating to our specific genres. We've been doing this for decades. Well, the show we've only been doing for a little while, but we've been talking about it for decades, and we always talk movies and what can we learn from them, do with them. We talk about key influences to the particular topic of the week, and then things that topic has influenced going forward. And if you're new to us, thank you. I hope you enjoy today. And if you would leave us a comment down below saying, hey, this is where I found you guys, or I liked it, I didn't like it, oh, you guys suck, or oh, you're great, whatever. We don't care. Just let us know you're here. Rank, review, do all those kind of things. Go to Apple and give us a star. We always appreciate that. My name is David. I'm here with Tim. Tim, how are you? What have you been doing this week?
Wow. That was a great introduction.
It was quick, dirty, and in there because we got stuff
because that's
do.
more fun. Wow. We'll get away from that conversation. What was I doing in my genre week? That's what we usually start these things off. It's kind of a little icebreaker for you folks. And this week, you will be pleased to know that I finally got around to seeing Talk to Me.
Oh, okay. I saw that before you, and it was a horror movie to get me.
You did. I have to say, this movie lives up to the hype. I really enjoyed it. I would definitely include it on our list of movies to cover. It made me realize a few things, too. This is an Australian import, but it was distributed, I guess, by A24. I guess they saw it, said, "Ooh, that's good. We're going to buy it and put it in the U.S."
They're really good at that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blown away by A24. All their movies impress me, and I started trying to figure out why, and then I realized it's the same reason we like musicals. They end tragically.
Yeah, well, the best ones do.
Well, our favorite musicals all end tragically, and none of these movies from A24 that I can think of, I'll let you see if you can volunteer one, end happily.
Good point.
They don't.
Now, there have been a couple of survivor stories. Like, wasn't the one about the wedding where she went to the wedding and then it turned into a hide and seek hunt thing?
I haven't seen that. Is that A24?
That's A24. And
it's Ready or Not, I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's the name of it. Yeah.
But I haven't seen that one. So anyway,
I believe that one ends happy. I haven't seen it either, but
I mean, the ones that come to my mind immediately are The Witch, Hereditary, Midsommar. None of those end happy.
Nope. They make you think at the end. Yeah, that's for sure.
And I think it comes at night. I don't think it ends happy either. Anyway, back to Talk to Me. This movie was directed by the Philippou brothers, Philipou. I don't know how to pronounce that. Their names are Danny and Michael. They don't have many other credits, but I did notice that they were the camera and tech crew on The Babadook. So they have experience with another very successful horror movie, indie horror movie. The cast is relatively unknown to me because they're all Australian, so I don't need to really mention them. Synopsis is when a group of friends discover how to conjure spirits with an embalmed hand, which doesn't really look like an embalmed hand. It looks like a mannequin hand.
Or a hand in a cast.
Yeah,
Looks like a
exactly.
cast.
They become hooked on the new thrill. It's like a drug crossing over or letting spirits cross over to them until one of them goes too far and unleashes terrifying supernatural forces.
Boy, does he.
And I'm telling you what, this movie spirals from there and it does not stop. I mean, it is in your face and brutal and does not end happy. And about 2/3 of the way through is when I made that realization this movie is not going to end happy.
Nope. Nope.
It gets 95% on Rotten Tomatoes with 293 reviews. And I'm on board. I think it's really good stuff. And like I said, I think this is why I like A24 so much.
It would make a really good double feature with It Follows, I think, because it has that same feel. It has a weird start, and then once you get into it, it is relentless, and something is coming the entire time.
Yeah, it's funny
And
that you say that because
just,
It Follows feels like an A24 movie, but I don't think it is. I think it was before A24.
oh, maybe.
Yeah,
But yeah, it does.
it
It's that
does feel
same
like
kind
an
of
A24 movie.
feel to it. Yeah, I think we mentioned A24 end of last season or sometime recently. Anyway, we've done so many, but I'm really impressed with their, if you go to their list and look at it, it's amazing. Just
It
the
is.
films that they have distributed.
We could
And
do a bonus episode, but the thing is we haven't seen them all, so it's hard to rank them without having seen a lot of them. I mean, we've
but we
seen a
could
good
maybe do a
bit.
bonus that's just on A24 and what we have seen,
Yeah, we could do that.
sort of
That
thing.
would be a
Yeah,
good idea, actually.
that would be a good
So,
one.
but
Yeah.
anyway, that's what
Let
I
us
did in
know if
my
you guys
genre
like it.
week.
For me, I went into, because we both come from theater and have done theater before, and I'm continuing to do that. And a friend of mine said, I'm thinking of doing A Wrinkle in Time, which was a novel that was turned into a couple of different film adaptations and then also has a play version. And so I said, okay. I read through it, and it's an okay adaptation, but it's not great. But then he said, so, well, if you don't like Wrinkle in Time, what's another science fiction play? So I thought, hmm, that's curious. I have to go through the catalog and look and
Alien.
see. Huh?
Alien.
Alien, the musical. Yeah, no. Well, there is, I've got an adaptation of 20,000 Leagues I read, and it was okay, but heavily reliant on video to help with a lot of the underwater sequences. So that's kind of thing. But I ran across one that won all of these accolades and awards, especially British, called The Nether. And you should look it up. You can find it online and read it. It is, let me get the credits. It's written by Jennifer Halley. It came out actually in 2013. And it's a sci-fi crime drama. And it is not only creepy, I don't want to say disgusting, but it makes you cringe in places, and it's very disturbing. It has a dark ending, just like yours. Basically, the setup is it's in the near future, and you are in the interrogation room of the police, essentially, and they have brought in this guy, and they are interrogating him. And at first, you think he's a witness, and they're getting his statement. And then suddenly they twist it, and he's the chief suspect. And what they're investigating is, it's set in a future where there are all these virtual realities that people can go into, that they can become a part of and experience, almost like Ready Player One.
Yeah.
Except this particular one they're investigating is called the Nether, and it's where pedophiles gather. And it is so disturbing in places.
You've talked about another sci-fi movie that has to do with profiling pedophiles.
Really? Have
Yeah,
I?
you
Well, this is a
have.
play, so it's
I
not
know this is a play,
movie.
but you mentioned a movie in either one of our genre week talks or Coming to Get You, and you mentioned that,
Hmm.
and you said it looked or sounded really good. I can't remember what it was, but
I had
yeah,
read this play a few years ago. I think I remember reading it, within like 10 years easily, because it came out in 13. But rereading it again this week, I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, no, I don't think I would recommend doing this for like a community theater, but it's definitely a show I would go see if someone mounted it. There was another one that was
We couldn't get them to do Rocky Horror back in our day. I can't imagine doing something about a pedophile.
There was another play that has gotten a lot of hype on the community and regional circuit called, I think it's called How I Learned to Drive. But that's basically told from the point of view of a woman who is going through therapy because of the uncle who molested her when she was a child. And he molested her by giving her driving lessons so that he could get her away from her parents, and repeatedly molested her over years. And so I may have mentioned that at one point.
Yeah, I'm looking. I can't really find it with the search, but I know
Well,
you have talked about a movie, and it's
Don't
about.
be searching pedophiles, Tim.
No,
I mean,
well,
I
it
don't
was
think it's-
it was something to do with like a profiling, like they're investigating or interviewing a suspect or something,
Mhm.
and
Well, that's what this is.
they go
So it may
into
have
the
been that I
mind. They may
mentioned it
go into
earlier.
his mind or something. I can't remember why. You talked about it, and it'll come to me after we finish recording today, I'm sure.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure it will. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway,
It
that's
always
all
does.
I've been doing, other than prepping for coming shows because they're kind of cool, all the stuff we have coming up. I'm excited
Yeah.
about this season. It's fun.
Awesome.
So far.
Wow. Segues.
It's scary. This play is scary.
We did talk about two scary things, and as a child, one of these movies terrified me, and it's a double feature. And before I go into what we're talking about, I believe it's the first television movie we've covered, aside from back in season 1 when we did Haunting of Hill House, which was a series.
It was a series.
Yeah, I mean, can you recall another television movie we've done?
Good question. No,
Yeah,
I don't think
so.
we have.
I think
Like
this
we
is the
haven't. I
first.
know Quester Tapes has been on my list. I know Norless Tapes has been on my list. What's some other?
Norless Tapes is maybe even produced by the same person that did this.
It is.
Today.
It's Dan Curtis.
Yeah.
It's Dan Curtis. But yeah, you may be right. This is our first TV movie of the week, mystery of the week.
Right. And this was a very, I guess, influential movie at the time. First, we're talking about 1972's The Night Stalker and 1973's The Night Strangler, which was the sequel. And for those of you that don't remember, they were so successful, they went on to spawn a series called Kolchak, The Night Stalker, that aired for one season with 20 episodes and is pretty much known to be Chris Carter's inspiration for the X-Files. So that's a big inspiration right there.
Yep.
This movie, I mean, just a brief synopsis, it's kind of crazy, but it is about a reporter that keeps stumbling on stories he's investigating that end up having a supernatural element of some kind. Rewatching them, they don't really make a lot of sense because it seems like he works for newspapers across the country and that his editor follows him to the very same newspapers across the country. I was like, how is this working here? But the dynamic element between Kolchak, who is Darren McGavin, and his editor Vincenzo, played by Simon Oakland, is the dynamic they brought to the series. Matter of fact, they're the only two carryovers that came to the series. The first one is about, is it prostitutes dying in Las Vegas and they're ending up being drained of their blood?
No, they are belly dancers.
No, I thought belly dancers was this Night Strangler.
Oh, that's true. In the Strangler.
And
yes.
then it may be prostitutes, or it just may be regular
Stalker
victims.
is just women alone.
Okay.
Night Stalker. Yeah.
Right. And they're being drained of their blood. And of course, the story evolves into a vampire story. The second one, they were like, well, how are we going to do this all over again? Well, this time they're being drained of their blood, but it turns out it's because of some serum that this guy uses to make himself immortal. And that's basically it. And all of these movies, both these movies, star lots of familiar faces from television and film. And my first question to you is, what is your experience with these movies? Because I've got a pretty decent story, I think.
This series was extremely impactful to me, and I think the movies as well. The movies were, I don't remember Strangler. I did not remember Strangler as well as Stalker. Stalker scared me when I was a kid. Vampires are my favorite monster, so it was I liked the way they were portrayed. He was portrayed and done. But this series was really impactful to me, and so much so that I could not believe it was only one season. I, for some reason, thought it was at least two, maybe three, and it seems like I could always find it, but maybe not. But I think so. I think it went in. I don't see how it could go into syndication with only 20 episodes. But I remember seeing it several times, seeing episodes several times.
You know, that's funny that you mentioned that. I'm pretty sure I saw reruns of it too. Maybe ABC just reran it.
But usually you wouldn't rerun it, especially in that time frame, the late 70s, early 80s. You wouldn't rerun it over and over.
No, we probably rented it on video or something in the 80s, would be my guess. But I think I saw it a couple of times maybe in the mid 70s, because that was around when it aired, 74, 75.
Right.
And I would have been 10. So, I mean, I would have been ripe age for watching it.
But and maybe it was also because it was so, to me, very influential in television history, so to speak. I mean, Stalker, trivia-wise, Stalker was the most successful TV movie of the time when it aired.
Yeah, it was. It was the most successful television movie up until that airing date.
Up to that point.
Yeah.
And so it was hugely, I think it had an influence on a lot of horror and science fiction fans for decades after that. Obviously, Chris Carter and everything else. But so I remember seeing it several times. I remember seeing The Stalker a couple of times. I only remember seeing Strangler once, and that's because I remembered the Bradbury building when they got there into it. I went, oh, okay. Yeah, now I remember this.
See, I didn't remember Strangler at all.
Yeah. That's the only thing I remembered from it was that, and then the fact that I didn't like it as much as the first one. But we'll get into that when we talk.
Well, the first one is far superior. My memory with this is that I've told this story to you about how my sister, when I was like 5, used to basically tie me to a chair and make me watch either old werewolf movies or Dark Shadows because she didn't want to watch them by herself. So she was a big influence on me when I was a kid with horror movies. Well, my mother made me watch the original air date in 1972.
Okay.
Probably because she didn't want to watch it alone. And my dad had nothing to do with this kind of stuff. He would be off reading a book or doing his thing. He was not a big movie watcher, and he was especially not a big horror movie watcher. But my mother loved them, and I have a feeling she didn't want to watch this by herself. So she made her 7-year-old son watch this movie with her. So I saw this movie when I was 7 years old. And it had a huge impact on me because other than like a Universal horror movie, I had seen Dracula maybe. That's it. I had not seen anything else. And around that time was when I was getting into horror movies. I think I told you I asked for a pictorial history of horror book for Christmas, and I got that, which introduced me to a lot of other films. But this one, very, very impactful. That there was a vampire roaming the streets of Las Vegas. I was totally convinced.
Well, and this movie has such good stuff going for it. I mean, Darren McGavin, for one, is amazing in it. The way it's shot, for a television movie, the lighting and the angles they pick and everything is really unique. I even love the whole, in the beginning, from the body's point of view of all the doctors looking in and commenting about it. That was great. The whole...
Keep this quiet. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah. The whole ending sequence in the house with the camera going up the staircase with him and the way we have so much side light and half lighting, it was really good, creepy, well done.
You're already segueing into scenes, so you might as well keep going.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess. But it's mostly just conceptual that I'm really yammering about because I liked the way the investigation was done. I like the fact that it slowly gets in there and then suddenly it's just like it's the template they use for every other episode.
It became very formulaic for sure.
Yes. But McGavin sells it and Oakland sells it and they really work on it. But it also has some other characters, some great lines. I've got lines in here like, He's high on pot or the hard stuff.
Right.
But he's got the winding camera that he has to and then to get to the next frame.
Yeah, and that's what you do when you're being chased by a vampire.
Yeah,
Take pictures.
Yeah. Take pictures. Yeah. The pacing works. The music. I always remembered. I've even got it in my watch list. I always remembered the jazz music. The music to this is very non-typical
You're right.
for a horror movie until they get to like the scares. Like when they get to the house in this one, there's a lot of that ominous, I almost call it Chris Carter music now because of X-Files, but it's that just tonal, creepy music.
Yeah, we actually talked about it in an X-Files on Patreon not long ago about how one of the episodes was done with like a snare sting, like a and there's a lot of that in Kolchak. I was noticing that as well. Very
there's
jazzy.
A lot of the beboppy, jazzy when he's driving and you're hearing the voiceovers because there's a lot of voiceover in this. Again, tribute to Darren McGavin. It's hard to do that and play it realistically.
But it worked with his character because he was a reporter, so he's just reading what he's writing. Yeah.
And I liked that style. So scenes, I liked the hook and his introduction at the beginning, the fact that we hear his voice first. February 7th, blah, blah, blah. Patty was walking home, da, da, da. You know, it's that kind of.
Yeah. And instead of seeing Scully typing it at the bottom, you're hearing him narrate it.
Yes. Yes. And he is self-effacing in parts of it. There are times when he's driving, he goes, what your modest reporter didn't understand was that at that very moment, such and such was happening over here. And it's like, yeah. I just liked the writing. It was really strong.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody listening to our podcast are like, oh, I got to go watch this, you're going to go back and you're going to know these guys are crazy. This is terrible. But for the time, it was great.
Yeah.
It is definitely a period piece. And I hold it in high regard primarily for nostalgic reasons. Also because I love the X-Files, and had this show not existed, the X-Files might not have either.
Agreed. So
because it did inspire the X-Files. So
I mean, it is very, when it goes to the pedantic scenes, it is very television shot. Zoom up on the mayor's face or whatever.
And the credits are cheap, and a lot of it looks like stock footage of Las Vegas. But it's still, I love it. As far as scenes, you mentioned one already, the scene where they stake the vampire on the staircase. I think I have a picture of it. Yeah, is great. The vampire himself, I really like too. He was a character actor that we'll get to in casting. But that and the other scene that I had up just a second ago, where they bust him in the hospital stealing blood out of the refrigerator there. And then the scene where the scene that really impacted me most as a kid, to me, that was the scariest, is when Kolchak goes in his house and he's on his way back to the house, because you see the car driving through the streets, and he's like finding the blood and taking pictures, finding the casket and taking pictures, finding a woman tied to a bed upstairs being drained of blood, taking pictures. Well, actually, he tries to rescue her, but then he can't because the vampire comes home. So he's hiding. Yeah. And then he's hiding in the house while the vampire's in it. All of that whole section took me back. And I was like literally a scared kid on the couch watching it all over again.
I loved it. It's probably the best scene in the movie that
it's
whole
a long
last like 12 minutes or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the ending of this is really heavy for a television movie. I mean, he essentially gets fired.
Right.
They move his girlfriend away from him with no contact and everything else. And Vincenzo,
for being an undesirable element.
An undesirable element
of Las Vegas. In other words, she was a hooker.
No. She was just a dealer at the casino, Tim.
Right. And they basically redact his story, print their own story, and tell him that if he says anything, they will have him booked
Charged
for
with murder.
murder because he did stake a man to death. And
Yes.
all the bodies are burned, so no little vampires are running around, and that cleans up and ties the entire thing up with a bow.
And I
neat
loved
little
the fact that
package.
they went to the end credits with no music whatsoever. It was very interesting. I
Yeah.
really liked that from a watching it and still creeped out and upset that he got screwed so bad, and they just keep that mood and going,
Yeah.
there you
Well,
go.
and it's funny that you mentioned that because I was going to do a little bit about production because I don't really know anything. John Llewellyn Moxey directed this. What is he? Who is he? I have no idea.
And he must have been a Curtis crony or
Or
something, because I don't
somebody
know
that
how he
worked with
got in.
ABC that just happened to get
Yep.
crossed paths with Dan Curtis. Dan Curtis is the obvious mastermind behind this. We have talked about him before as being sort of a Mike Flanagan of his time. He did.
Yes.
He created Dark Shadows, which was the
Hmm.
horror soap opera that ran for 5 or 6 years. He did these two movies, which he's well known for. He did Trilogy of Terror with Karen Black. And
Hmm.
then we also did last season, I believe, we covered the theatrical movie he did, Burn Offering. So
Yep.
we've had Dan Curtis on here a pretty good bit.
Well, when it comes to horror on television, he is
Yeah.
where you go first, really. I don't think anybody in the 60s was doing horror on television. I mean,
No.
other than
What
Dark
Twilight
Shadows.
Zone. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the first person who said, I'm going to tell monster stories on television, kind of thing, I think, in a realistic way, not in a Scooby-Doo way. But
Well,
the
it was very
screenplay,
much what Stephen King does, bringing horror into the modern world.
yes.
But it
Yeah.
was pre Stephen King because I don't think Carrie came out till 73 or 74. This
Yep.
movie came out 2 years prior.
Yes.
But
Richard.
Richard Matheson
Yep.
was a big influence on Stephen King. And this screenplay was written by Richard Matheson. So you can see the tie-in there as far as the horror in the modern world thing.
It was, I know it didn't have a lot of faith from ABC in the studio. They restricted the budget to 450 grand. So that was
Wow.
the entire budget for this movie, essentially. And they shot it in 12 days.
Yeah.
It was shot in 12 days. Also, I do have in my notes that Gail was written by Richard Matheson as a prostitute, but standards and practices said, no, got to change it. So she's now a dealer at the casino.
Yeah.
Sort of
What
thing.
really surprised me was that it's not a Matheson story. It was written by Jeffrey Grant Rice, or the
Mhm.
story was his concept, and then Richard wrote the teleplay. Because I had always assumed this was a Richard Matheson story, but I guess I should have known better because I read all his stories and I've never seen anything like this in any of his books. So
Right. Well, and hadn't Rice written it as a novel or something first? Wasn't it written?
he wanted it to be a novel, yes, and it didn't get to be a novel. But then he ended up being able to subsequently release a book tie-in after this aired because it was so successful.
Well, oh, yeah. Yeah, like we said, it was the most successful television movie of its day.
Yeah.
I also have in my production notes that the music for the theme of this, that was originally written for the Quester tapes, which
Oh,
is
I didn't know
a
that.
Gene Roddenberry property.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I found that in researching. I was going, oh, that's cool. I love that.
Yeah.
But not a lot of production of it, other than the fact that McGavin did have a really strong hand already, and we'll hear about it more later, but already in crafting the characters and working with some of the dialogue and everything else. Evidently, Dan Curtis and the director trusted him enough to say, yeah, if you want to rewrite that, go ahead, Darren. That's fine. And he did do a lot of rewriting of his own dialogue.
Well, yeah, and I read too that I don't know if it was Matheson's idea or the Rice guy that originally wanted Kolchak to wear Hawaiian shirts and shorts, and
Yes.
McGavin was like, "No, that's not appropriate. Let me come up with something," and he came up with that seersucker suit and the hat, which is very iconic.
Did you read why he came up with that? What his justification for that was?
I don't think so.
That Kolchak got fired from New York. Gail mentions it, that he got fired like 4 years earlier or something like that. his rationale was he hasn't been able to afford a new suit since
Right.
then.
He's wearing the same clothes because he can't afford anything
Yeah.
else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
read that. You said something about it being the most widely viewed TV movie at the time. I've got in my notes that it was a 33.2 rating and a 54 share. I
Yeah.
don't know how to interpret that. Do you?
Well, the share is the number of the population watching it.
So it's more than half
So more than half of the people who own televisions that are Nielsen rated were
watched
watching the
it.
show when it aired.
That's great.
So that's great.
That's why so
Yeah.
many people remember it.
I think so. And I also think it was a cultural touchstone. I really do. I remember seeing it on the cover of TV Guide.
Mhm.
It just seems to me watching it that it had more gravitas than I thought, really.
Well, I mean, it's 1972 television. It's nowhere. I mean, there's no way it's going to live up to what you remember in your mind.
Well, true.
Yeah. Cast. I have a few things I will say, and then when we go to the next one, obviously some of them will be carryover. As you mentioned, Darren McGavin is the lead. He plays Carl Kolchak, a very iconic, memorable character. However, most of you folks out there remember him for something else, and it is a movie called A Christmas Story, which has become a cult classic at Christmas. It's the one where the kid wants a BB gun or something, and there's a
Red
lamp
Ryder.
that's a woman's leg. I'm not real familiar with the movie. I've not watched it that much.
Oh, I have to watch it. I have to watch it every year.
Yeah, so most folks remember Darren
And
McGavin for
yes.
that. I remember him for this, and I'm sure you probably do too. Carol Lindley plays Gail Foster, the undesirable element. Carol Lindley, I know mostly from the Poseidon Adventure. She was a 70s actress, primarily TV, I want to say. She's great, and she was great in the Poseidon Adventure. But
no, she's great in this.
Yeah, she's fine. Simon Oakland is his cohort, his editor from the newspaper. He is the Scully to Kolchak's Mulder. Because Mulder is, because Kolchak is the believer, whereas Vincenzo is the non-believer, and they always fight about it as far as his stories. He is a very big character actor that I know mostly from West Side Story, but he was in Psycho. He was, I think, one of the doctors, and lots of television. And ironically enough, he used to get confused with actor Claude Akins, who also happens to be in this movie, because they do kind of look a little bit alike. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
Ralph Meeker plays Bernie Jinks. He's the one that ends up helping Kolchak at the very end kill the vampire on the staircase.
Yeah, he's the Fed.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of characters in the. If I had one complaint about both these movies, is there's too many characters. They needed to cut that down a little bit, especially the second movie.
Yeah, distinguish them a little bit more.
Right.
They're also a very similar body type too. All of them.
There's just there's a lot of people that could have been combined into one person. For instance,
there's the
Claude
other sheriff
Akins.
guy, there's the mayor,
like a Fed, and there's too many. Claude Akins is a character actor I mentioned earlier, started strong in films, but ended mostly on television. Both Claude Akins and Barry Atwater, who is also in this, appeared in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
Yeah.
The classic Twilight Zone episode.
And Barry Atwater's the vampire.
No. Is it?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. It is Barry Atwater. His name is Skorzynski or something, though. That's what I was thinking.
Kozinski, I think.
Yes. Skorzeny. Janos Skorzeny. Yeah, was played by Barry Atwater. He has done lots of genre stuff, including Star Trek. He played Surak. The role was originally intended for Robert Quarry, but he was forced to decline due to his contract with AIP. Do you know what we saw Quarry last in?
No, what?
He was Darius Beaterback in Dr. Fives Rises Again. which we covered a
Okay.
while back.
Well.
So yeah, Barry Atwater, very familiar face. But there's other familiar faces in this, like the DA, another character, is played by Kent Smith. Do you remember what we saw him in?
No, but I remember seeing him.
No.
No.
He was Oliver Reed in Cat People. He was the lead in Cat People, opposite Simone Simone. That's what
In
I'm
the
saying.
original?
The original, the Val Lewton original.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And
No, I
it's
didn't
funny
know that.
because a lot of these people were older in the 70s and getting TV parts, but he was in the movie from the, what is it, the
That makes
50s,
sense.
I think, or 60s.
And who did he
No,
play
maybe
in this?
40s. He plays the DA.
Oh, the
Hank.
DA. Okay, yeah. Right
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Elijah Cook Jr. is in this movie. Another Star Trek vet. He was in Rosemary's Baby, The House on Haunted Hill. I mean, another genre, a lot of genre ties to this, actually. Fred Hurley, another Star Trek connection, played Cyrano Jones in The Trouble with Tribbles. And what does he play in this? Stanley Adams played Fred Hurley. Who was Fred Hurley? I can't even remember. Like I said, there's so many characters in this. And
he was one of the guys he interviews.
That's exactly. And in one scene, Larry Linville plays McCurgy.
He's the doctor, the coroner.
Another interview scene where they're talking to people, and there's so many people in the room, I can't keep them straight.
He's also one of the doctors who leans in at the beginning.
Okay.
He's one of them because I recognized him because of the mask. I went, oh, it's MASH.
But yeah, Larry Linville, we know as Frank Burns from MASH, and he's in this. So, like I said, tons of familiar faces. No awards for this movie because, well, any awards are posthumous and usually do with a DVD collection or whatever. Yeah. And of course, it is not on the 1001 movies because I don't think any television movies are included on that list. So,
right.
Oh, Edgar Allan Poe Awards did give a win to Richard Matheson for Best TV Feature.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah. And I think it was. And it's superior to its sequel. So I do think it's good and works. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you got anything like trivia wise you want to discuss before we move on to Keys?
Nothing for this one, other than the fact that I do have in my watch notes, I really like the staking, but I don't like the squeal. It's too high pitched and doesn't work for the squeal. But I do like the fact that they say vampire. They're not afraid to go. I mean, Kolchak from like the third scene is going, he is a vampire.
Yeah, how many syllables can you throw into that line?
He's so adamant about it.
Yeah, he's over the top. He's very funny. I have. Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh. So Chris Carter, I mentioned, was a big fan of the show and came up with a similar concept for the X-Files. Yeah. But he was such a big fan that he wanted to get Darren McGavin to guest star on the X-Files. This I did not know, however. He wanted Darren McGavin to play Kolchak.
Yeah, of course.
But McGavin said, no, I don't want to do that. So what they did was they changed his name to Arthur Dales and made him the father of the X-Files, like the original first investigator on the X-Files, which makes perfect sense. It's very poetic, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can understand that because as we talk about the Strangler and the series and everything else, Darren McGavin was extremely invested in this project, a lot. I mean, he was an executive producer, but not given credit and not compensated for it. And working long, long hours because, again, Kolchak's in almost every freaking scene. And he's the reason the series was canceled. ABC wanted to do another season. And he's the one that said, no, I don't want to do it. And they decided they didn't want to do a sequel season without him. So, but mostly because his name was the freaking series. So, yeah, I think he was a huge part of it. So I can understand him later on with Chris saying, no, I don't want to bring that back up again. That was a big part of my life and it's gone. I don't want to do it. Sort of thing. Yeah.
But it's great that he was on it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, moving to keys, I mean, I don't have a lot, but the X-Files is obviously my number one key. I've mentioned it
Uh,
several times.
X-Files is number one. I've got a precursor key, which is Twilight Zone. That
Okay.
whole anthology feel of although it wasn't ever centered around a central character, essentially Rod Serling became that because he was the in and out every time.
Mhm.
But he wasn't part of the stories themselves. But that whole anthology feel, you had talked about it developed formulaic. As I watched this one in Strangler, I suddenly got the key too of like CSI, which becomes extraordinarily procedural. It's got to have this in the first 5 minutes, and then we're going to have this part, and then we're going to have this part, and then we're going to
Right.
have that. And at the end, it's going to be just him against the monster or whatever it is. And then the wrap up where nobody believes him or they destroy his evidence.
Yeah, it's the same thing over and over and over
Yep.
again. But I didn't get
Yep.
tired of it because with the series they had a different monster each week or whatever,
Mhm.
monster of the week. The only thing different was maybe Darren McGavin's toupee was better because they had more money. Dracula is obviously a key to this.
Of course.
And I think one of the reasons why this had such an impact on me as a kid is that other than Bela Lugosi as Dracula, I had probably not seen any other vampire movies yet because I was only 7. I would not
Hammers.
have seen a Hammer movie on a
Mhm.
rerun yet. So this was
Right.
like the only other vampire I'd ever seen. I was like, wow, there's other vampires besides Dracula? That's crazy.
Yep. Well, that's why one of my keys is Salem's Lot.
Yeah.
Putting a vampire in a modern environment.
Hmm.
I can't remember having seen everything I'd seen up to this point with vampires have been gothic in some way.
Hmm.
So this was totally different than that.
Yeah.
Um,
And a good example of that is a scene like when they're at the swimming pool. It's like, are they battling a vampire around a swimming pool? That was
Yeah.
crazy. And he was
Yeah.
killing. I mean, no one, they were shooting him. It wasn't working. He outruns a car. I mean, there's all kinds of, he's like superhuman.
yeah. Bullets don't work.
No.
So, and I've got all of essentially the sequels that came from this. So Night Strangler, which came after the TV series, which came after that.
Yeah.
When McGavin said he wouldn't do another season and they decided to do it, they took 2 remaining scripts and put together a TV movie of stuff they had previously shot. And
Yeah.
I never saw that,
I
but
didn't
the
either.
reviews of it look like it's awful.
Well, I mean, it's clear it's got things in it that probably don't relate and they were already seen prior in
Right.
another episode. So it sounds horrible to me. But
And in 2005, there was a reboot.
Yeah.
That I've never seen either.
yeah, it's
So-
simply called Night Stalker. I think it ran for 1 season. I haven't seen it either. It had
Oh, is it a series?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
I think it was. Was it not? I mean, I may be mistaken, but it
I
had
couldn't remember if it was a series or just a TV movie.
it had that Townsend guy in it.
Okay.
That didn't he play Lestat in Queen of the Damned or something? I can't remember.
no.
Anyway, I never watched it. It didn't appeal to me.
No.
It's funny that you mention there was a third movie planned though, because I've seen 2 different scenarios for that third movie that was planned.
Well, the biggest thing I've seen was before they were doing the series, before they commissioned the series, Matheson and Philip Nolan, another Star Trek
William
guy,
Nolan.
William Nolan, yeah,
Yeah.
wrote a third movie called Night Killers.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
And
But
William F. Nolan, remember, is from Logan's Run and other Dan Curtis projects like Burn Offerings. Yes.
and evidently the studio said no, we'd rather have a series, is what I've gathered in
Yeah, and their proposed script was going to have Kolchak in Hawaii, Honolulu. He was going to be like Magnum PI, only a reporter. And he discovers a cover-up involving UFOs, which is very X-Files, and a nuclear power plant and important people being murdered and replaced by androids.
which is
That was
which
the
is
third
Westworld.
movie. That's a long way from vampires and immortal people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we get to Night Strangler, I'll let you know of another plot I heard for the third movie too.
Okay, that'll be curious.
As one other little tribute I have to Richard Matheson, one of the vampire's old aliases, you know how they listed his old aliases, was Paul Belasco. That is a reference to the spectral antagonist of Hell House, the Richard Matheson novel. Belasco is mentioned often in that movie and in that novel, which is another movie we need to cover. But anyway, and Belasco is very similar to Blasco, which is the birth name of famed Dracula actor Bela Lugosi. So there's a little tie in there as well.
I've got Trilogy of Terror because that's another Dan Curtis thing, but actually she is watching television and it is showing Kolchak on the television. And except they took the color out to make it a black and white movie. And I thought that was interesting.
They say it's a French film or something.
Yeah, something like that.
That's funny. I mean, I guess we're just going to have to keep going back to Matheson because we really need to do Hell House and we really need to do Trilogy of Terror, even though there's really only one memorable section of that movie.
Correct. If Karen Black ain't in it, we ain't watching it.
Well, so, Karen Black's in all the stories. She plays different characters. But
that's right.
The one that's memorable is the last one. The Zuni fetish doll, which... All right. Well, I guess that's enough for The Night Stalker. Let's quickly move on to The Night Strangler, which is not as good a movie, but it is a sequel, and it did lead to, as you said, the television series. This movie came out the very following year, 1973. Also produced and directed.
Quick. They commissioned it quick.
Well, and it was also shot in 12 days. I mean, it's like Dan Curtis knew how. And Dan Curtis actually directed this one. He did not just produce it. He directed it. So, I mean, it's okay. Dan Curtis's claim to fame is The Winds of War. I think that's really funny. My parents loved that miniseries, but all I think of is horror because that's pretty much what he did.
Yeah.
Winds of
think
War
that's
was
what he
kind
loved.
of a fluke.
I think that's what he really liked to do. So I think that works.
Yeah. Written by the same two people, Richard Matheson and Jeffrey Grant Rice. Instead of airing as an ABC movie of the week like the first one, this one aired on ABC's Wide World of Mystery. Yeah. They always changed up the introductions to those movies of the week.
Yep.
Scenes? A lot of this one doesn't make sense to me.
This one's hard to get behind from a story perspective, I think. Like you said, I think it is confusing. I think part of it is they were so close, they were relying on the popularity of the previous movie. So there wasn't a lot of exposition, or we're just thrown in a different city, same characters, here we go. Plus the fact that the hook isn't really supernaturally feeling enough. If that makes sense. It wasn't until like halfway through when they started talking about the rotting flesh and stuff that you suddenly go, oh, it's a monster then.
It's zombie.
It's not a Jack the Ripper guy. It's something else. So scene wise, well, the blonde is cute. Nina Wayne is her name. She plays the belly dancer that ends up dying and
she's a familiar face too. I know exactly who you're talking about.
She did a lot of like the comedy stuff, a lot of one-offs
or something.
But I found out in trivia, just as a side note before scenes, that she was married to John Drew Barrymore.
Yeah,
her husband.
So she's got a link to the Barrymore clan. Yeah.
But so let's see scenes. Okay, Wally Cox is great in this. So all of his little library scenes are good.
Yeah.
He's funny and he's cute and he works.
He's not the only one that thought, you're not the only one that thought Wally Cox was cute.
Okay.
I'll get to that in casting.
Okay. I guess the other scene would be, I mean, probably the confrontation scene, just because it's memorable to it. And there's actionable stuff. I mean, he breaks the glass and there's all of that, but
yeah, I mean, you've got the blood is also a component in this one. It's like they had to say, oh, we need to get blood again to be part of this serum for immortality. So it's like they were almost trying to copy the vampire story, but he's not a vampire. And it's called Strangler, which I don't know. I just think of the Boston Strangler. I don't know. This movie to me has a lot of problems. The title's one of them. The plot is one of them. I love the scene that sticks out to me the most. Doesn't make any sense to me. It's the one where he's in the underground of old Seattle and comes to that table with all the cobwebs and the skeletons sitting around it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why would people just sit there and die?
Yeah.
What are they there for?
It was a cool, creepy scene.
It looks very creepy.
And the Strangler character actually makes a reference to talking to them, like one's his wife or something.
Yeah, he's crazy. Yeah.
So
immortality's done him a number, just like some of the Anne Rice vampires. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the first one put too many characters in it. I think this one tried to put too much backstory without a lot of linear following. Like this period went to this period, went to this period. They kept taking the periods out of sync, like Civil War, and no, 1912, no, 1934, whatever. I also agree with you about the blood. I think at this time, blood is scary, whereas opposed to, I think if they redid it now, it would be, we have to have this particular spinal fluid or enzyme or whatever that he needs.
Oh, yeah, there's a big key to this one. Yeah.
And that would have
Or
been
a liver.
scarier. Yeah.
Yeah.
To do it that way. I also did not, I thought this screenplay was not as strong as the first one. I don't think Matheson did as good. And I also think I like Vincenzo in Stalker. I like him in the series. I do not like him in this movie. He screams in every freaking scene.
It's not just him. It's McGavin, too. They scream way too much in this.
Yeah.
It's like all of their fights are overplayed.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah. Overwritten and overdramatic.
To the point where Darren McGavin actually throws like an ashtray at him through a window and
through the window.
Yeah. I was like, this is not realistic. Yeah.
Yeah, it was overblown.
But at one point, they're working together, and he's like, I guess, at the newspaper discussing, what this murder could be with Vincenzo, and it looks like they're in a motel room. I'm like, is this an office? What is this place that with the curtains closed? It did not look like an office.
Well, I may be confused, but wasn't it that at the very beginning, Kolchak doesn't have a job. He's just shown up in Seattle because he's trying to get his original Night Stalker story published. But Vincenzo overhears him in a bar.
And it's like, why is Vincenzo there?
And Vincenzo got reassigned. He got fired from Vegas and reassigned up here.
Right.
And so he hires Kolchak. And that's where that weird room. So I was going, are they at the hotel? Are they in his hotel room?
It looked like a hotel room. It literally looked like a hotel room and not an office.
Where are they?
And I was like, this is strange. But it's also, are all newspapers owned by the same people? They just transfer people to different cities?
Just bring editors.
His job bounces around. It's almost like on a broad scope, they didn't think supernatural things could all happen in one place. So they try to put them in different areas. Whereas Stephen King did the opposite. He put them all in Maine.
Yeah, it's all in Derry. Derry has everything.
Yeah, Derry, Castle Rock, whatever, Salem's Lot. Yeah, so but this one, they have to bounce around the country. It's just weird.
So the first one's Vegas. This movie is Seattle. I think the series is Los Angeles, right? They went ahead and said it's in LA. I'm
pretty sure it's in LA, but they keep talking about going to New York in all the movies. Yeah.
Right. And the like I said, I think scene-wise, that would be really only it. I didn't like Joanne Flug in this. I mean, she's okay, but she doesn't really do anything.
She's not as good as Carol Lindley, but she is the love interest. That's another formula. Kolchak has to have a girlfriend, and she has to have a seedy job, so she's a belly dancer. Same thing.
Yep. But I did like the production design, although the whole concept of you have an entire freaking city below Seattle was stupid. And then it got to the point of, and in addition to being down there, there's also power. The elevator works. There's lights on everywhere. I was
Yeah.
going, what the hell is going
And a
on?
lot of those skeletons sitting around that table were from Dark Shadows. I recognize them. Yeah.
Don't you have any of those hanging in your basement, Dan?
Yeah.
Come on, bring them out. Yeah.
As far as cast, we got Darren McGavin returning. Richard Anderson is the villain in this. And Darren McGavin and Richard Anderson are two of the more familiar faces of 1970s television.
Oh, yeah.
And both of them were on The $6 Million Man. They both played. McGavin starred in the original pilot movie.
The pilot.
And then Richard Anderson took over in the series as Oscar Goldman. You mentioned Joanne Flug is in it. She was Lieutenant Dish from MASH. So there's a MASH connection because Larry Linville was in the first one.
In this one, she's what? Charisma Beauty? Is that her name?
I just have her as Louise Harper.
Oh, she's Louise Harper. Nina Wayne is Charisma Beauty.
Yeah, the blonde. You're right. Yeah.
Simon Oakland. You didn't do that name, did you? Really? Charisma Beauty.
Simon Oakland also returns. He's obviously, he and Kolchak make these movies. Simon Oakland, Wally Cox, John Carradine, and Richard Matheson all have ties to Twilight Zone. Captain Roscoe Schubert was played by Scott Brady. He was like a Robert Wagner looking dude back in the day. You mentioned Wally Cox, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent just because of my knowledge.
Okay.
But he played Titus Barry. He usually played comedic parts, usually character actor parts, not leads.
He was a very Don Knotts type, a mousy. Who's that Jeter, the Jeter actor? Very similar to him. Okay. Wally Cox and Jeter always remind me of each other.
Yeah, he was always a small character in like the Beverly Hillbillies or something.
Yeah. This
was his final length production or feature length production. He died a month after this movie was released.
Yep.
What a lot of people don't know, and a lot of this could be speculation, but a lot of people think that Wally Cox was Brando's true boyfriend. Marlon Brando.
Really?
Yeah, Marlon Brando's always been Marlon slept with both sides. Basically, he slept with whoever he wanted to. But he is the one that got Wally Cox's ashes and kept them in his bedroom and said he conversed with them nightly. Their close friendship was the subject of all kinds of rumors. And Brando once told a journalist that if Wally had been a woman, I would have married him and we would have lived happily ever after.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Really?
Yeah, it's on record. He did this in an interview. Writer-editor Beauregard Houston Montgomery said that while under the influence of marijuana, Brando told him that Cox had been the love of his life.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm a big Brando person. You know that. I have read countless books on him. So I knew this going in. And then I was like, what are they going to say about Wally Cox? I need to look at some stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. I wouldn't picture that, but.
Well, no, because Brando's like this huge sex symbol. And he looks, like you said, Don Knotts.
Yeah.
Basically. But, most of the time love works that way. So
I guess love is strange. Yes.
Speaking of other character actors, Margaret Hamilton is in this
Wicked
movie.
Witch. Yes.
The Wicked Witch of the West plays Professor Crabwell in a very memorable scene. John Carradine is in this movie. He has played Dracula in Universal sequels and is a very big, Universal.
I always remember his
gnarly hands.
Fingers are gnarly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had arthritis when he did that movie. You're thinking of the Howling, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Nina Wayne played Charisma Beauty. You mentioned her. Guess who else is in this? Grandpa Munster.
Grandpa Munster.
Al Lewis plays the tramp that lives down underneath Seattle and ends up being one of the victims to Dr. Richard Malcolm, the immortal Dr. Richard Malcolm. Ivor Francis plays Dr. Webb. He's another very familiar face. But then the most familiar face to me in this is Richard Anderson, who plays Dr. Richard Malcolm. mainly because of Oscar Goldman. And we recently saw him in our redux of Forbidden Planet.
Who's basically, see if I get this right, because I had to rewind it and watch it again just to see. His father came up with a serum, and he then tried to replicate it, and it took a while, but the secret ingredient was this brain stem blood or whatever that he had to get, and it was not immortal. It only lasted 21 years. So every 21 years, he has to have 6 more cc's or 8 more cc's or
Exactly.
whatever to recreate the potion or the
Yes.
serum.
And Kolchak, via his friend Wally Cox at the library, discovers that, oh, there was a series of murders like these committed 20 years ago in 1952. And then there's one that was
not
in
the
19...
library. He's actually in the basement. He's in it's in the newspaper. He's in the archive of the newspaper. He works for the publisher.
Right.
Yeah.
And he works for one of the guys that has a conflicting interest too, if I'm not mistaken. Titus Berry is his name.
Right.
So yeah, they discovered that, and that's a huge key for me. I mean, I'm sure it's a huge key for you when we get to keys.
And
this story has been done again.
So for 21 years he lives in the basement or in the city under the city,
underneath Seattle in the catacombs with cobweb skeletons.
Can never clean anything up. Leaves everything dusty and cobwebs and carriages and everything.
Well, he's mad.
Sure.
He's a mad scientist.
He's a mad scientist.
I mean, basically, this is a mad scientist scenario, I guess you would say, because he's not a vampire. There are no awards, obviously, for this movie, and it is not on the list because it's a TV movie. And even Richard Matheson did not get a Poe Award for this presentation.
No.
Because it's not that great. But it did lead to the series. So.
And the series itself, I think I mentioned this offline the other day, but the series, I went back and watched a couple of the episodes and still remember, it's still formulaic, still very dated for television at the time, but with some good scares. Sometimes there's good jump scares. Sometimes there's good creepiness, atmosphere scares to it. It's well worth a series rewatch and a Blu-ray purchase, probably.
Yeah, both films had decent makeup for the time, especially for television, too.
Yeah. And the TV series led to a lot of other keys from that. So I ended up finding out like Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale both wrote for Kolchak. Before it was some of their first writing credits.
Oh wow, that's wild!
And that was really neat. They did the one episode that you were talking about, Chopper. That's one
with the motorcycle,
with the motorcycle man, headless horseman story. And I would have really liked to have seen Kolchak continue. And like I said, it turned out that Darren McGavin, from like the first episode of the television series, started rewriting and being an executive producer and calling the shots and even ghost directing some of the episodes. And he was just so invested in it. And he was, by the end of the season, he was just exhausted and said, still not getting the scripts I want. I'm having to spend so much time rewriting stuff. I just don't want to do it anymore. And that's why they canceled it. They would have.
Is it? I thought it was ratings. They didn't. Was it him pulling the plug?
Yeah, it was totally him. They would have done another season. I saw 2 different sources that said the ABC was willing to actually went to him with an offer, and he was like, "Nope, I don't want. I'm just exhausted. I don't want to do it anymore."
Wow.
And that's sad because I would have liked to have seen where they could have gone, but then again, maybe with some more support.
Oh, they had some funny episodes, man. Wasn't there a werewolf on the Love Boat, like a cruise liner? Yeah.
Very, very well said. Yes, werewolf on a Love Boat.
It was before the Love Boat existed, though. It was like it was a cruise, and a werewolf was on it. I remember that. My favorite one you mentioned to me off camera was the swamp monster that lived in the sewers of L.A.
Spanish moss monster. Yeah,
Spanish moss monster. Yeah.
There's another vampire one, and I think that vampire had
ties to the original.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Scorzini guy or whatever.
Yeah.
They had a zombie one. They had the energy monster, which was like a UFO one.
They had a one.
They had Mr. Ring, R-I-N-G, which was a robot. a humanoid robot. The ones they had on
$6 million man.
$6 million man
Yeah.
with the faceplate that came off and their face extended like 6 freaking inches or whatever.
It's very Westworld too. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of my favorites, though, that I watched, and the Spanish Moss Monster, because even after I talked to you, I went back and watched another one. Demon in Lace was the name of it. And it was written by David Chase, who went on to do Sopranos.
Yeah, you're right.
Series.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
And it's about a succubus. And it is actually really freaking scary.
Okay. I'm going to have to go back and watch some of these. Well,
There were
obviously,
several
that's
that
our
I
biggest key is the series.
Yes. Which came directly from this movie. Yes.
Yes. But the story was, and we've talked about this before, how Chris Carter is not ashamed to lift a story from an old
Not
thing.
at all. Nope.
And for those of you that remember the first season of the X-Files, there's a character named Victor Toombs in an episode called Squeeze. And then he comes back later on in the season in an episode called Toombs, self-titled.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically needs 5 livers every, so many years, like 20 years, and in order to be immortal. And he comes out of hiding and eats 5 livers and then goes back into hiding and doesn't turn up for another 20 years. It's the exact same story as this movie. When I was watching it, I was like, holy cow, Chris Carter totally ripped this off.
Oh, totally. Totally. And I also have It. It's the same way. He comes back every
so many years. It's like 16 or 18. Yeah.
So that whole terror the
hibernating monster that comes back. Yeah.
Well
it's a cliche now because we've seen it in 3 things with Stephen King, Richard Matheson, and Chris Carter.
Yep. And I have another odd key. I've got Dawn of the Dead because all of the makeup of these people who are dead looks blue. They look like bad zombies in the bodies.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah.
I had mentioned to you, if you don't have any other keys, I had mentioned to you a potential 3rd movie being set in Honolulu earlier, but there was another one that, and this is the plot. At the end of the film, Kolchak is telling Vincenzo and Louise Harper, now both out of work thanks to him. You remember they're riding around in the car and she ends up popping up in the back seat.
Yep.
That he is going to drive them to New York City and that they'll love New York. Director Dan Curtis and Richard Matheson had originally planned to do a 3rd Kolchak movie set in New York. Kolchak was going to discover that Janos Skorzeny, the vampire from the first film, was not only not dead, but active again. And the film was going to complete a planned trilogy of Kolchak movies entitled Trilogy of Terror. So that was the original concept for that title. They were going to unify it by bringing the same vampire back in the last film. I would have liked that better than the Honolulu thing, I think.
I would have too. Yeah, definitely. Well, and I've also got in my list, I've got actual serial killers. So Richard Ramirez was called the Night Stalker when he did all of his murders in Los Angeles. And you mentioned already the Boston Strangler. I had those as well.
Yeah, I just thought that was a terrible title, the Night Strangler.
Night Strangler.
They were trying to make it alliterative and tied to the first movie.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And again, trying to catch lightning in a bottle is what I think they were trying to do. And failed with this second film, but I think they succeeded in the series, obviously, since it imprinted on so many of us, including Chris Carter. And a lot of that's just due to Darren McGavin. He's just really good at this character.
Yeah.
Really good at showing fear and obstinance and humor.
And he was smart because as a producer, he was like, how can I make this iconic? Well, let me give him this terrible suit with this hat. And I mean, you always see that when you think of him.
Yeah. And his passionate drive for the story. I want the truth. I want the story.
It's Mulder.
Yeah.
The truth is out there. But Vincenzo is Scully saying, no, we can't print it.
Yeah, we can't use that. Yeah.
Yeah. Love the show. I'm so glad we went back to these two. I knew they wouldn't be as good as I remembered them, but I knew I would still love them. So
Yeah, and I just want to, well, Tim and I both want to say that's what we think. What do you guys think? Do you like it? Have you seen these? Hopefully you saw them before you listened to us. But if not, you can go back and watch. It's basically the same formula for both of them and for the series. But we'd love to know what you think. Leave us a comment or a review down below. Let us know. Ring the bell, subscribe, do all those things. If you are new and weren't aware of it, we also on our webpage, you can go back and listen to all of our past seasons. This is our 7th season. So you can listen to all of that and go back and let us know what you think and find your favorites. We also have a Patreon, which you guys can support, and it has the X-Files. So if you like
of the
Kolchak,
X-Files.
you can go back, and we are going episode by episode, usually 2 at a time.
Yeah, we're in the 3rd
X-Files
season now. We've done 2 seasons of Star Trek, and we're in the 3rd season of the X-Files.
Yeah. So X-Files Declassified and the Dilithium Chamber are both special YouTubes that we do just for our Patreons. And so for a little bitty tiny bit of money, you're helping us, and we're also giving you guys those in return. And until next time, Tim, I'm not sure what we'll have.
We're going into classic sci-fi, right? Smack dab in the 50s.
Yay. Good stuff. And
I love all the retro stuff we're doing this season. We're starting off with a bang going into the past. It feels good.
Yeah. And we've also got some moderns that I've never heard of before. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah. Until then, I guess I'll see you then.
All righty. I'll see you then.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.